Hello out there, Internet, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking a bit about trouser fit and reading wrinkles and altering clothes that you may already have. And we're going to be starting with and how to fix the patterns. We'll get to that too. This is sometimes called a smiling crotch. You can kind of see the wrinkles going out in a sort of radial fashion, or like cat whiskers, right? So you can kind of see them radiating out, right, as opposed to ones that go straight across the figure, which indicate being too tight all the way across. So more or less what the whiskering is doing, or the smiling crotch means, is that your run from, so if you think about trousers like a set of stairs, right? So you have your run going horizontally and your rise going vertically, right? So your, well, that's the back of the trouser, more or less here, but, you know, if you're looking at the red part's the front of the trouser, the green part's the back of the trouser. So what you're looking at here is that the run here is a little bit too short, and you can kind of see that in, no, that's going the wrong way. There we go. So you can kind of see or think about that as if the front of your pelvis is sticking out a little bit further than what the pattern is allowing for. If you have any seam allowance there in your altering trousers, you can let it out at the fork, and no one will ever be the wiser to get it to fit better. Some people, you'll want to look at both the front and the back. If it's doing the same sort of thing in the back, it's the same problem, but some people need a longer run more towards the back, and some need it more towards the front. So, you know, some would need this more on the back here, some would need it more on the front. But when you lengthen that out, that gives a little bit more space front to back, and that helps a lot alleviate those whiskers coming out from the crotch, which is never a nice look. The opposite to this is a frowning crotch, which this wrinkle kind of shows the best here for traditional frowning crotch. You also see it a little bit here where it's not completely all the way across, but you can see that there is extra length here that you could probably pinch out to get that to fit closer to the body. And when it's when your crotch seam is fit as close to the body as possible, you're the least likely to blow it out, right? So if, let's say, they were hammer pants that were down here, the reason why the hammer pants are so baggy is so that you have enough fabric when you're taking a stride that you don't end up, you know, pulling out your crotch seam. It's the same sort of idea with, you know, tightly fitted trousers. If your crotch is hanging out way below where you are actually at, or way out in this case in front of where you're at, or for here, and the same sort of thing here. If this was going all the way across, that would be more indicative of fitting that you would want to do all the way around. But since it's just pretty much in the unfortunate crotch area, that's an indication that your run is too long. So this is the opposite of the smiling crotch, right, where you want to take away a little bit. So you'd want to shorten your run a little bit, either on the front or the back, or most likely both. You'd probably take it out evenly, depending on, you know, your figure. You want to be cognizant of who you're fitting, right? If there's someone who is particularly flat on either side, you'll want to take that into account, right? But for the most part, you can take it out from the fork right here on the back, and right there, or right there in the front, and right here on the back, and just to mark that in the fitting. I'm going the wrong way again. Here we go. Rather than going in and you know, putting an uncomfortable safety pin right here, usually what I do is I go from the back and do what's lovingly called in the industry a magic tuck. So if you go from the back and you watch in the mirror the fronts of your wrinkles, right, and the front of the person, and you pull right on that center back seam, pinch out enough until it sits flat against the body, right? And then you put a pin in there, so it's just right, at the right across the hips instead of trying to get into where you're actually going to be altering it. And you can measure that distance where you have that pin. So let's say that you pinned it here, and it's this length, let's say, right? So from here to there, that's the length it is. I mean, this is extreme, but regardless, what you would do is you'd measure that, right? And then you take that amount out at the fork, and then out to a nice smooth line there. But it helps alleviate the awkwardness of nobody wants a pin there. It's just like with tutus, nobody wants ruffles there. That's just uncomfortable. So that's the easy way of pinning that in a fitting. It looks weird, and if you are working with a designer that hasn't necessarily seen that before, you'll want to explain that no, you're not going to add a seam like directly across the butt in a fish dart or whatever. It's going to be taken out at the fork, where, and by fork I mean where all of these seams come together. So if you were to look down into the trousers, right? Say this is the center front of the trousers. Here, we'll do this. We'll do center front, center back, and this is side seam and side seam, right? The fork is, if this is the crotch seam, right? And there's William, if you hear the bells in the background. He's very curious of what's going on. This is your inseam, right? And the fork is where it all comes together, right? That's what I'm meaning with the fork there. It's like a fork in the road. It's where everything intersects together. So you'd want to take out there, right? And reassure the person you're working with that, oh no, it's not going to be visible. No one will know. It's not going to be a weird alteration. So it's not that bad of a fix, and it does make the trousers look a lot better. All right, so we've had smiling crotches and frowning crotches, and let's move on to the next one here. So you can kind of see here a few different things that are going on here. Here you can see the kind of classic pulling straight across. Remember what I was saying about the pulling straight across here? So this is indicative that this one you'd want to let out a little bit so that it could actually sit where it's supposed to on the body. Same thing with this wrinkle right here. So what that's doing is, if you can kind of imagine, since this is too small, what it's trying to do is it's trying to run to a smaller part of the body, more or less, and failing at it, right? So it's getting pushed down. William is helping here. Hello, William. He is very cute. Go figure. Another thing that you're looking at here are the classic wrinkles underneath the classic wrinkles underneath the butt, and that's one of the things that all three of these have in common, right? Like this one probably has the frowning crotch here, and this one is too short of a run here, so you can see the smiling wrinkle lines here. All right, I'm going to hold the cat because he really wants to help. Here we go. Okay, kitty cuddles, that's much better. And then with this one right here, you can see how far away this is sitting away from the body, which isn't necessarily bad, but depending on how tightly fit your trousers are. But what all of these have in common are those wrinkles directly underneath the butt, right? And basically what this is doing is that it doesn't have enough room across the seat, and so this is shoving it down to kind of move further down to get to the smaller spot, right? So what you want to do there is, okay, I'm being climbed like a post, because I am the ultimate cat toy, apparently. All right, so basically what you'd want to do here is you'd want to let it out a little bit across the hips if you can, if there's anything there. If you're doing a mock-up, then yes, absolutely, let it out a bit at the hips there. But, and see if that helps relieve it enough that it'll sit up. Also probably at the waist a little bit as well, so that it can sit further up on the body. If if the waistband is sitting exactly where you want it in the mock-up, let's say, right? Like you look at these gentlemen right here, and this is exactly where you want that to hit. More or less what you want to do is you want to scoot this up, so you still want to let it out, so that usually with men's trousers, these ones aren't, right? These aren't particularly nice men's trousers, but they're set up to be let out at the center back, if they're set up to be let out at all, right? I would highly recommend making it an easily alterable spot. When you're making trousers, it's traditional to do so. It doesn't take that much extra effort or fabric to leave extra at the center back and make it easy to be alterable there. And I mean, it's one of the places that humans tend to change the most is in their abdominal girth, right? You drink 8 ounces of water and you can gain 1 inch in your waist. Well, I mean, depending on your size, if you're a particularly small person. And it makes a big difference, right? So that's one of those things that changes quite a bit. So having that extra there is, and making it easy and fast to change is good, in my opinion. All right, so let's say your waistband is sitting exactly where you want it to be. All right, so I'm going to look at this. So if your waistband's sitting there or here on your back, right, so we're looking at the back here, what you do is more or less, once you've let this out here, maybe if he's, if the waist is not too small, it's just the hips that are too small, you may need a deeper dart. You may need to make that a little bit bigger. This guy's been doing a lot of squats. Oftentimes, darts in commercial garments especially are very scant. They're very much aiming for the not quite sticking trousers on a frog kind of look. So that's a fairly common thing to have to go in and if it's on a mock-up especially, to make a deeper dart, right? So that you have that waist to hip ratio correct to the person that you're altering it to. And then you can pinch out, if you let it out at the center back, if it's set up to like with a chain stitch or in a lot of commercially made nice trousers, it's a chain stitch to the back, you can pretty quickly knock that out and then pin it to where it needs to be. And then you want to go in and pinch out. So once this is sitting, nice and eased out here, right? So all these horizontal lines are all out of there, and you have your center back opened up. What you can do is you can pinch out this extra fabric, scooting this up, right, until all of this lies smooth. All right, so what that looks like on the pattern here is more or less you're going to be taking out a chunk like that, right? So that's fixing the underleg wrinkles. There are other things wrong with these trousers, but that's the way to go there. All right, so I'm once again going the wrong way. There we go. Okay, so we talked about how these are all slightly different, right? Like this one, you could probably take out a little bit at the center back here, but scoot the whole thing up. So this one would be likely taking out just this amount here just to get that to go up. This one particularly would likely be to lengthen the run, right? So that you have enough to get out there, as well as probably, well, the hips look okay. Like we're not getting a lot of straight across lines. It's mostly just the the very smiley crotch. If you can kind of see where those wrinkles are, where they're whiskering out rather than going straight across. This one probably would be let it out here and then take your chunk out of the back. This guy has all sorts of problems. I would say, first of all, if you can let it out all told all the way around, so a bit out at the waist and the hip here, but out there. I mean, honestly, probably get larger trousers, frankly. You'd probably want to shorten up your run a little bit here, since we're getting some of the frowny stuff there, although I would wait until you scoot this up to do that particular alt, and then have them pull them up until they actually sit at the higher waist, which I think these are made for, and then pinch out however much is there. So these are a little bit more complex. All right, so that's those ones. Here we go. Some nice straight across horizontal pulls, right? So these wrinkles are not really, if you're looking at them here, you can see a bit here. That is kind of unfair in that with the satin trousers, you can hide nothing, like nothing in satin trousers. But they do demonstrate quite nicely, and part of that is how she's standing, right? Like that's part of where this comes from. Same thing with this. Like if she were standing actually straight on, it didn't add the extra bulk of her hands into her pockets. Same thing with here. Like I realized that, especially with red carpet looks, it's very much fan service. You stick your hands in your pocket and, you know, you don't leave a whole lot to the imagination, right? Like that's, I get that. I do. But as far as showing off the wrinkles that I wanted you to see, that it helps a bit. So pretty much what we're looking at here are the horizontal straight across, right? And I talked about this a little bit before with the other ones there, but pretty much what that means is that you need a little bit of extra all through where it's pulling straight across. And you can let that out in all 4 quadrants, right? Depending on, you know, how bad it is. Like none of these are so egregious that you'd be like, oh man, let it out in every seam, all of them, all the time. It probably would depend partially on what William just showed up with paper stuck onto his nose, because he is adorable, and apparently stuck his nose onto a small Post-it note. Anyway, so who would have thought that without having a camera on, we would have had feline parts in this particular film. Anyway, so depending on what kind of fit you have, like this one, depending on where the zipper is, if you have a fly that you're dealing with, plaids too, these ones line up, which, oh, yay. I mean, if you're going to do plaid, like, actually do plaid. Please, actually do plaid, and line it up properly. If you haven't seen Lori Curtis's video, I'll link to it up there in the corner, about lining up plaids and so forth. If you haven't checked out her channel, you should. It's very informative and very helpful in a lot of different ways, and is generally really amazing. I had the pleasure of going to grad school with her, and she's fantastic and a fantastic resource, besides being just a very lovely and nice person. But yeah, if you are watching these for your edification, you should probably be watching hers too. We do cover different things. So, all right, onward. So we have the... here you can kind of see, remember when I was talking about when sometimes you get interesting kind of foldy lines coming down when fabric is trying to run to the thinner area? That's more or less what you're seeing here, which is not fair. Like, I'm sure these fit at one point, and if you were trying to get them to sit up here, that's not going to really happen with these. Like, that's not going to be a thing. And there's all sorts of stuff going on with here. You see you're smiling. You've got popped pockets, which is another indication that it all the way straight across is too small. But also, like, just so. But I wanted you to see that sometimes the straight across wrinkles aren't entirely where you think they're going to be, and it is worth letting it out at the top or the bottom of wherever you're seeing it kind of being pushed to one side of a curved spot. Same thing with down here. You can kind of see the fabric just going, no, and trying to run either direction. That's more or less what that is. And I want you to be able to look at that and recognize the difference. It's not that much of a difference, except for how you would run into it. Like, it's, a lot of people will look at that and say, oh, the rise is too tall, right? And I know I don't think, I mean, unless stylistically you don't like the height of the waistband. Let's say that you don't like that the waistband is here, right? Or once you were to actually let these out and let this up to where it's actually supposed to be, that you don't like that height. That's fine, right? Like stylistically, you can have your waistband anywhere from like basically being waders to all the way underneath your bust, and all of that's a design decision. I don't have to deal with that, right? Like this is more in the fit issue. So rise is much more of a design choice. So if you want to have a lower rise in your jeans or your trousers or whatever you're building, right? Then that's you can look at that and mark it wherever you want it to be. Right, and take off the waistband, and in-built trousers, especially with jeans, whew, that is a painful alteration. I would not recommend it if you are faint of heart, but sometimes you do it, like if it's just not the right character or they have an interesting fit. But that's more less what that is, and especially for particularly round bellies, one of the things that you can do is you don't have to have a straight center front. You can curve that out. Like you look at a lot of the old Victorian trouser patterns for corpulent figures, they will seriously have like a giant curve coming out there. And that's fine. Like there's no reason to not alter your pattern to curve to do that, especially with particularly round bellies. Yeah, so that's more or less that. You don't tend to run into that very much in the center back, just because most people tend to stick out more at their butt than at that's the small of their back, oh gosh, what is it called? Well, the bottom curve of your spine, more or less. There's a specific name for it, and I will probably have it in the closed captions. Oh man, or I'll think of it later. Anyway, but I mean, there are some people that have very, very flat butts that don't necessarily need much of a dart, if at all, and they might have a slightly flatter curve in the back. But for the most part, you aren't going to curve that way for a back, if that makes sense. It may just be more parallel. All right, so we've talked about that. All right, so here's some more lovely problems with straight across stuff, but I'm going to ask you to ignore that for now. One of the things that we're looking at here is these kind of wrinkles here, right at the top of the calf. Now, to be fair, that is partially because these are just the wrong size trouser, right? Also, he has his hands in his pockets, so it's kind of throwing the whole balance of the trouser forward. But if you see this on someone like this, if you have at least 80% wool, one of the things that you can do with a particularly curvy figure, and just in three-dimensional humans in general, if you start seeing like the trouser front touching on the front of the quads and the calf back here, you can totally take your trousers over to an iron on your crease and pull in that direction. So more or less pulling your trouser so that the trouser curves, much like the leg does, but when it's on the person, it'll look like it's straight. And it doesn't, you don't have to be particularly heavy-handed about it, like you aren't curling it around like a curling iron, but a little bit of curve front to back can help alleviate the quad and calf problems, especially in these particularly tight fitted trousers. It's the same sort of deal as with most shaping of suits. If you can't, if you're working with like a linen suit or a silk suit or a, heavens to Betsy, a polyester double knit, whatever, then you probably have to actually fix this in the fitting of it, all told, right? Like some of this you could probably pull up a little bit there. You might want to go with a slightly wider leg, just a tiny little bit, if you can't pull it. But I did want to talk a little bit about the miracles that irons can do. So, here we go. Another thing that we want to talk about is hems and breaks and the difference between very thin, fairly modern trouser legs, which are usually matched to your tie or lapel and your hat brim, right? Like if you are wearing a very thin, traditionally, like do what you want to do. It's the modern era, right? But traditionally speaking, what you would do is if you were wearing a thin-legged trouser, you would wear it with a suit with a very thin lapel and wear it with a very thin tie, and then wear it with like a trilby, right? A little thin. That's a hat. Okay. With the more traditional wide, it's not really wide leg, but it's a more traditional like banker's width of trouser. You more traditionally wear it with a slightly wider lapel and a slightly, be more medium lapel, medium tie, and like a fedora, right? So a wider brim. Now, if you're doing the whole like swing suit, zoot suit, or, zoot suits are gathered in at the bottom and tend to go this way, but that's a whole nother story. But if you have even wider, like even 70s width of trouser, or even belled slightly, that's where you start getting into the super wide and super wide ties and that sort of thing, right? So you tend to want to match the widths together. But the main thing that I wanted to talk about here before getting too far into the weeds is notice how high up these are because of the curve of the foot, right? That arch here means that if you have a super wide leg, you could come all the way out to the floor, right? And see no shoe whatsoever, right? But the thinner and the thinner and the thinner you go, the higher up it needs to come to miss the break, right? Or have a little bitty break. Like this is like a banker's amount of break. It is a very respectful, I have definitely had these tailored specifically to me kind of break, but the purpose of the break more or less is to show off less sock when you sit and as a sort of sartorial elegance, right? These really thin trousers, you're going to see sock. Like there's no getting around it. Short of putting in a little gusset here, you're not going to get them this long. That's not how, tight-legged trousers work without getting a super amount of break or tons and tons of wrinkles here. Now, I've certainly seen that. That is a fashion thing too, but just be aware that if you're struggling to try and get, long enough trousers that you can't see a lot of sock when you move or you sit, with tight-legged trousers, that's why. That's the choice you make. If you're going with thin-legged trousers, it's going to be higher. You're going to have to look at socks. All right. So next up here, if you have, another thing to think about too is how much of, remember when we were talking about smiling crotches? And with fairly flat fronts. If you have a very wide leg, this is another one that I wanted to talk to you about briefly, having a fairly flat and baggier front here at the crotch seam is perfectly legit, right? To have that, more skirt-like front, rather than pulling it in to be very fitted and then going out to a wider leg. They're different shapes, but that's how you would achieve that. If you want that more skirt-like front, is to have that longer run. I think I just put him in here as a look. You can look nice in nice trousers here, with the very short and thin trousers. Also, he doesn't have his hands in his pockets, so, nice. And I like to end a little bit on, isn't that suit lovely? So that you have a little bit of eye candy to consider after having looked at all of the things that could potentially go wrong with your fit. And this isn't comprehensive. Like there are more things that you can run into, but these are the major ones and some of the ones that I think are less intuitive. And I hope that helps a lot in your trouser fitting and that helps you with trying to understand what it looks like on a person and what it looks like on your pattern. Thank you very much.